Step off a curb right now in your mind and notice which foot moves first. You didn't choose it. You didn't think about it. Some foot just went first. The same one it always does. The same one it's gone first since before you can remember. Kick an imaginary ball, and the same thing happens. One foot swings. The other plants and holds your weight, steady, automatic, without instruction. Most people never question this, but somewhere around 1 in 5 to 1 in 10 humans has a foot preference that runs opposite to the majority, and that small, quiet minority turns out to be carrying something much stranger than a simple habit. Scientists call it footedness, and for most of the 20th century, it sat almost entirely in the shadow of a much more famous cousin, handedness, which is strange, because footedness might actually tell you more about your own brain than your hand ever could. Here's why. Your hand preference gets shaped by the world around you. For generations, left-handed children were physically forced to write with their right hand in classrooms across dozens of countries. That kind of pressure warps the data. Your feet never got that treatment. Nobody ever corrected a child for stepping off a curb with the wrong foot. Which means footedness, unlike handedness, developed almost entirely free of social interference, giving researchers a rare, undisturbed window into how your brain actually organizes itself. The British psychologist Chris McManus at University College London has spent much of his career studying exactly this kind of asymmetry, the broader phenomenon where your body isn't a mirror image of itself, where one side quietly leads and the other follows. His research, along with work by other laterality specialists, helped establish something researchers had suspected for years. Foot preference lines up with brain organization even more consistently than hand preference does. A set of studies led by researchers including Lauren Elias found that footedness predicted which side of the brain handled language, processing more reliably than handedness did. In plain terms, your foot may be a cleaner signal of how your brain is wired than your hand is. So why would a quiet minority of humans end up wired the opposite way from almost everyone else? And why hasn't evolution simply erased that difference over hundreds of thousands of years? This is where the story takes its first real turn, and it starts, oddly enough, with violence. In 2005, two French researchers, Charlotte Faury and Michel Raymond, published a study looking at left-handedness across traditional societies around the world, including groups where interpersonal combat, wrestling, and one-on-one confrontation were still a routine part of daily life. Their finding was striking. In societies with higher rates of violent conflict between individuals, left-handedness was significantly more common. They proposed something now known as the fighting hypothesis. Being in the minority isn't a disadvantage in a physical confrontation. It's an ace hidden up your sleeve. Right-handed fighters spend their entire lives training against other right-handed fighters. A left-handed opponent throws off their timing, their instincts, their whole internal rulebook, built from thousands of previous encounters that never prepared them for this one. The rarer left-handedness became, the more dangerous each individual left-hander became in a fight, which is exactly the kind of pressure that keeps a minority trait alive in a population instead of quietly disappearing. Now picture that same logic playing out at your feet instead of your hands. Reconstruct a scene from deep prehistory. A small hunting band moves through tall grass, spears in hand, tracking something large and dangerous. When the moment comes to plant, pivot, and throw with full force, each hunter's dominant foot digs in first, taking the weight, anchoring the whole motion. Most of the band plants with the same foot, trained the same way, moving the same way. But one hunter doesn't. His stance is mirrored, his weight distribution reversed, his throw arriving from an angle nobody else in the group quite anticipates, including, crucially, any predator or rival that's learned to read the movement patterns of right-footed hunters. In a species that spent enormous stretches of its history fighting, wrestling, and hunting in close physical contact, an unpredictable minority stance wasn't just quirky, it may have been quietly, consistently useful. Here's the twist that complicates the tidy version of this story. You'd expect, logically, that if your dominant foot and dominant hand both come from brain lateralization, they should always match. Right-handed people should be right-footed. Left-handed people should be left-footed, tidy and symmetrical. They often don't match at all. Researchers studying laterality have repeatedly found large numbers of people with what's called crossed dominance. a right-handed person who is left-footed, or the reverse, sometimes even paired with a dominant eye or ear on yet another side entirely. This messiness matters because it undercuts a very popular but oversimplified idea you've probably heard before, the notion that people are simply left-brained or right-brained, one tidy hemisphere in full control of everything you do. Real human lateralization doesn't work that cleanly. Different systems in your body, hand, foot, eye, ear, can each be governed somewhat independently, layered on top of each other in ways that don't always line up. Your foot may be quietly running its own separate program from your hand, shaped by its own evolutionary pressures, and those pressures may run deeper into your past than you'd expect. Long before anyone studied footedness directly, researchers had already found strong evidence of consistent hand dominance stretching back over 1 million years. The archaeologist Natalie Womany examined cut marks left on ancient stone tools, the tiny scratches made when an early human's hand slipped while napping flint into a blade. By analyzing the direction and pattern of those slips, she was able to determine which hand ancient toolmakers favored, and the results pointed overwhelmingly toward right-hand dominance stretching back roughly 1.5 million years, long before modern humans existed at all. Separately, researchers studying hand stencils in Ice Age caves across Europe, painted by blowing pigment around a hand pressed to the rock, found that the overwhelming majority of stencils were left hands, meaning the artist's dominant right hand was almost certainly the one doing the blowing. Handedness, it turns out, isn't a modern quirk. It's an ancient, remarkably stable pattern, present in your ancestors long before anyone wrote a word or built a permanent shelter. Footedness doesn't leave behind cut marks or cave paintings the same way, which means nobody can point to a single Ice Age footprint pattern and say with certainty how far back the specific quirk of left-footedness goes. But given how deeply hand dominance runs and how footedness may reflect brain organization even more directly, there's little reason to think foot preference is some recent accident. It's more likely a trait quietly riding along in human populations for an extraordinarily long time, kept alive generation after generation by the exact same logic that kept left-handed fighters dangerous. Being different from almost everyone else isn't a flaw to correct. Sometimes it's the whole advantage. You can watch that ancient logic play out today without realizing what you're looking at. Elite football clubs actively scout for left-footed players, not despite their rarity, but because of it. A left-footed striker curls a shot in a direction goalkeepers spend far less time training against. A left-footed midfielder passes at angles defenders don't naturally anticipate, because almost every defender they've ever faced was trained to read a right-footed game. None of this is coincidence. It's the fighting hypothesis, still running quietly in the background of a sport that has nothing to do with fighting at all. Just a modern echo of an old evolutionary bargain. Stay rare, stay unpredictable, and the rest of the field will never quite know which way you're about to go. So step off that curb again, in your mind, and notice which foot moves first. If it's the one almost everyone else uses, you're following a pattern that likely stretches back over 1 million years, worn smooth by generation after generation doing exactly the same thing. If it's the other one, you're carrying something rarer, something your body has been quietly running since before you had any say in the matter. An old evolutionary trick still working exactly the way it always has, whether or not anyone around you ever notices which foot went first.